I don't know what it is about stainless steel braided AN lines, but they just look so dang good. And I feel like they tidy up the engine bay and the car quite a bit better. There are some performance gains or aspects out of it. So like on my drift car, I ran PTFE stainless steel braided AN lines from the fuel cell in the back all the way to the engine. And what that did is that the PTFE fuel lines are ethanol safe. Now I don't actually need to do that on Project Creampuff here. With Project Creampuff, I do have a need to do some custom lines. So I've got an aftermarket fuel pressure regulator and I've got an aftermarket fuel rail, plus the fuel rail has different lines and fittings than the OEM 4AG one, and let alone this is also an aftermarket one for a beam. So I do have some needs to do some aftermarket lines in here, and I figured I might as well use some nice AN PTF line because I have some laying around. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna adapt the stock hard lines, because this has a GTS fuel tank, GTS hard lines. I'm gonna adapt from the GTS fuel lines to the GTS, to like a standard GTS fuel filter, to the beam's fuel rail, the beam's fuel rail to the fuel pressure regulator, and then back from the fuel pressure regulator to the stock return line. To make it easy to adapt the hard line, there are companies that make these adapter style AN fittings. So what they consist of is a female tube nut or AN nut, a ferrule, whatever, and the male AN fitting. So what you do is you take your hard line, you put your female fitting on the hard line, you put the brass ferrule on there, and then what you do is you tighten it all together. And what that does is that crimps it nice and tight and creates a airtight and fuel tight seal. And then you've got a nice spot where you can attach your AN line to. And if you look closely in there, I've already got that done. The reason why I had to do that on this car is the stock line had already been modified for an engine swap. And so the fitting that would have gone to the stock fuel filter, which I've opted to keep, was cut. So I ended up cutting the line back a little bit more. I cut off the flare fitting, removed the tube nut that would have been there, and then installed my adapter here. And now I'm gonna make a line that goes from this to the fuel filter. To adapt the stock fuel filter to AN, there's actually a couple of additional fittings that you need. So I've got my little cheat sheets in front of me here. The top and the bottom are different sizes. So the top is an M12 by 1.25, and the bottom is an M14 by 1.5. So you need these adapters that go from these metric threads, M12 by 1.25, to a -6 AN. That's the size of AN fuel line I decided to use. And the bottom one, an M14 by 1.5, to the 6 AN. Now the bottom is really tight, so I ended up getting a really tight 90-degree fitting to go on there, so that way it comes out of the fuel filter. You've got this metric to AN adapter, and then you've got a real tight radius, 90-degree, to go feed back towards the firewall, so that way I can attach a straight AN line right there. I've threaded on portions of the AN fittings, the straight AN fittings on both the fuel filter and on the fuel line, so I can get an idea of where the fuel line needs to sit at. This is gonna be a really short line, but I can see it's gonna be, we're gonna go with a 3 5/8 inch. That's what we're gonna do. No, 3.5 inch line. That's all it's gonna take is 3.5 inches. So what I've gone and done is I've added a bit of painter's tape to this so I can mark it out nicely, neatly. So I ended up going a little bit over and marked it at like the 3 5/8, so it's a little bit larger, but we'll end up, when we cut it, that'll get trimmed down a little bit. I also leave the tape on it when I cut it, so that way it keeps the stainless steel together a little bit. You can see it on this side. It keeps the braided bits together so they don't get all frayed when you cut it. Now for the next bit of this process, having that tape on there makes things really easy for assembly, because you just slide these guys on, just like that. And then we'll start with, we'll go with this side first. I like to have a little pocket screwdriver handy for when I'm doing AN lines. It really, really helps, so that way you don't get your finger stabbed a million times by these little pokies. But for PTFE, you've got these little ferrules that go between the stainless steel braided and the fuel line itself. So unfortunately, we do have to pry it apart a little bit here to do that. So now we get this guy. I'm gonna push it all the way down. This part sucks the most. So once I get kind of started by hand, I'll come in and I'll try and use this rubber mallet to tap it on the rest of the way. It's kind of hard to see, but I make sure that the ferrule or the line is all the way up to the lip inside of the ferrule fitting here, so it's there. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna slide our other end in. We've got it all the way seated. Now comes the fun bit of getting it to tighten over top. I get it started by hand. They make special wrenches to do this, but usually I just use a couple of adjustable wrenches. Now, the reason why they make specific wrenches for this is because these are aluminum, and by using steel tools on it, like I am, you can mar up the fitting and cause it to not look as pretty and possibly damage the fittings if you really crank down too tight. I've done quite a few of these, so I'm pretty familiar with how tight I need to go. So I'm not too worried about that. Plus, I want it to look tidier, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So there we go. That side is pretty well crimped down. Now we're gonna do the other side. The reason why I like these PTFE fittings is not only because the fuel line is safe for ethanol, but also because they've got this little bit of flare on the end, which makes it a lot easier to go over top of that stainless steel braided bit, especially when it gets frayed out. Okay. All right, there's our first little line. Let's go put that on. And there you can see my adapter fittings in all their glory. I've taken off one of the mounting bolts to the fuel filter just to make it easier to get this line attached. Swivel this back down and bolt it back in place. There we go. I still have some finessing to do on the fittings and the hard line to get it all perfectly straight, but at least that one's done. Now we're just gonna repeat that process with all the other ones. What I did was I just put the fuel line right here on the attachment that's on the fuel filter. I'm gonna add some tape over here, mark it, and then we'll start cutting and make some fittings. We're definitely gonna give this one a little bit of extra slack so that way the engine has some room for movement. Oh yeah, and before you put these on the car, hose them out. You don't want to send junk through the injectors. So both of these have a bit of a swivel to it, which is good, so that way you don't have to clock the fittings before you tighten them down. So I can crank these down and then I can still rotate them once I get them on the car to get them right in the right spot and the right clocking. That looks pretty nice if I do say so myself. Now, the back line is going to be a bit tricky. You want to give it enough space to keep it away from the ITBs, but also still keep it look nice and tidy. So maybe about here. That turned out so nice. I'm really happy about that. I will say that I would like to move the fuel pressure regulator somewhere else, but I think this is kind of the only spot that I've got for it. I gotta wait till I get all the AC components in and then maybe I'll be able to move it someplace else, but I think this is where it's gonna live for now. All right, that's our update for Project Creampuff today. We got the AN stainless steel braided lines on and made and all that good stuff. So now I'm just waiting on a fuel pump and then we'll wire the fuel pump and then I think it's just a matter of plugging some stuff in, and then we can start it. This is freaking awesome, man. I am so stoked. The fitment is a little tight with the JSP fuel rail and the Panic ITBs, but it does work. It's just very tight. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. If you got questions, put it in the comments below. I'll try and get to you as quickly as I can, as best as I can. And yeah, thanks for watching.